Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. I am also a Thai citizen. I'm a naturalized Thai citizen here in the kingdom. And this video is kind of more of an opinion piece, although we are going to be doing some rather deep legal analysis, but mostly in the context of the way the media has described this so-called mask mandate regime, or as it should specifically be put, mask mandates, plural. These seem to have been promulgated initially, well, not fully promulgated, but they were decreed, if you will, by the local governors of various provinces. And as we'll get into, there's been a lot of media misconception, in my opinion, regarding this and this overall topic. And we're going to try and kind of sort some of this out and deal with some of the things that, and people seem to be getting, in my opinion, rather hysterical, frankly, on many sides of this issue. This is not an anti-mask video. This is not a pro-mask video. This is more of a trying to have some common sense and take a deep breath and let's look at the situation for what it is, and also try and suss out the difference between sensationalism and the actual law and the actual regulations and what's going on here. Because frankly, and I'm saying this as a Thai, I'm getting kind of tired of the hype surrounding this. The regulations such as they are, and we'll get into that here in a minute, because I think the legal analysis that there's even an ability to mandate this is rather spurious. Now, we'll get into that here momentarily. But yeah, there's just been a lot of, I think tensions are high. People don't like that we're in this non-lockdown, which it's not technically a lockdown, but basically we're back at basically where we were at back in like February, early February or January, where, you know, restaurants cannot have dine-in services here in Bangkok at least. There's, you know, obviously there's no bars, there's no entertainment, there's no major group gatherings, there's no concerts, there's, you know, we're basically on all but lockdown. You basically go to work, and even then, you know, there's certain restrictions associated with that. It's my understanding the parks are closed, which I really do kind of question the common sense behind, you know, allowing people to be out in the open air. And we'll get kind of into that. Now, again, this isn't pro or con. I view myself as kind of middle of the road on the overall issue. And where I would create kind of a spectrum here, I don't want to get into efficacy a great deal, but I think you have to, or at least you have to get into the mask efficacy debate for a moment in order to discuss law and policy. And this is in any context. So, for example, coming out of the US or out of the West, and there seems to be this same kind of debate, although I think it's a much more slanted debate in the sense that there's a lot more people, and I think it's due to a lot more people not really understanding the issue as a whole, but there's a lot more people seemingly here in Thailand that seem to be on one side of this issue as opposed to the other. And for example, the US, it seems to be a little bit more, and it seems to be a little bit more of a less lopsided debate, I guess you could say. Now, I understand there's a lot of politicization that has gone into this whole issue. I don't want to get into all of that. The only reason I'm even bringing up efficacy is the way I view it is there's sort of two poles of this debate, and then there's sort of a gray middle. There's one pole that takes, and pole, I mean P-O-L-E, you know, there's sort of two different poles, polarity to this. There's one side of this, or a segment of sort of one side of the overall notion of this that views mask efficacy as sort of self-evident, if you will, that they are clearly very, very, very effective at either mitigation or stopping the spread of COVID. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a virologist. It's not even within the bailiwick of this. On the other side, there is, and I think this is overall a smaller group worldwide, but I don't think it's that much smaller necessarily compared to its relative counterpart. On the other extreme is folks that just don't believe it works at all, and, you know, or don't believe in the efficacy of masks whatsoever. That's on the efficacy debate. Then in the middle, I think that there are quite a number of people that fall somewhere in there that kind of say, well, I don't know, and they feel kind of, and I use this word specifically, they sort of feel one way or the other about it from an efficacy analysis standpoint, albeit they may not necessarily have a lot of data points, they just sort of feel a certain way about it. I kind of think, and this is my personal opinion, that sort of where you are demographically probably factors in a lot to that. If you're an older person above 60 who has certain, pre-existing conditions, you may really feel that, and you may be right, frankly, the use of masks by those around you may have a profound effect on whether or not you may be infected with COVID. At the same time, if you're 24 and you're fit as a fiddle, you may not view it in the same light. So let's start there and understand there's sort of this efficacy thing. That's not the purpose of this video. I'm just talking about that as sort of a background, okay? Full disclosure, where am I at? I'm sort of somewhere in the middle, but I'm sort of in the middle on the standpoint of I don't see that there's a lot of data points on either side to support the notion that it's this overarching exigent need that we must all be masked at all times. And for that reason, I don't think it's, for a lot of other reasons, but for that specific reason on the efficacy issue, just my personal opinion, I don't see where it needs to be mandated to the level, at least here in Thailand, is currently being mandated, where they're saying at least to even leave your house, you have to wear a mask. I'm sorry, I just don't agree with that based on the data, or perhaps I should say the lack thereof, regarding exactly the efficacy of this, etc. Now, do I understand the argument in favor of masks, for example, on a crowded SkyTrain car? Sure, I can totally understand that argument. Do I necessarily want to wear a mask on a crowded SkyTrain car myself, and therefore do I not necessarily use the SkyTrain? Not as much as I once did, because understanding the regulations, or that's a private enterprise there, and they're saying, look, in order to use this conveyance, you need to be masked up. I used it, I would say, a lot less than I did in the past, but I do a lot of things a lot less than I did in the past prior to this COVID response coming down. Those are my personal opinions, and I put them on these videos not to advocate them. I want to be clear. It is so people watching these videos can understand my bias, so that when we discuss this stuff, especially in the legal context that we're about to get into, you understand my bias so that you can make your own decisions about what you think regarding all of this. Because I do have some real issues with the way in which the media has been portraying the promulgation, if you will, or I should say the announcement of these decrees that masks must be worn at all times out of your house in Thailand. The way that this is being reported, in my opinion, I won't say it's disingenuous, but I definitely think it's been sensationalized, and I definitely think it glosses over a lot of the finer points that if people really thought about it, they would sort of say, well, hey, wait a minute, the entire legal basis for this is somewhat shaky, and then on top of that, these presumptions we have about these requirements aren't exactly what they seem, at least based on what the media is sort of having folks believe. Or maybe I shouldn't say having them believe, but it's just sort of perhaps at times kind of omitting or sort of, again, glossing over. Now, a recent article from the Bangkok Post print edition, this was from Saturday, May 8th, 2021. This is one of the latest things I've seen on this, and when I read it, I got a little bit, for lack of a better term, annoyed, because there was a lot in there that, again, was being stated as sort of legally a foregone conclusion, for lack of a better term. And the article is government to cut fine on face masks. So government to cut fine on face masks. Bangkok Post print edition, Saturday, May 8th, 2021. And I'm going to quote more than I usually quote out of this stuff. Usually I like to take little excerpts, but there was a lot in this one. And buckle up, this is a bit of a longer video than some of the videos we usually do. So, quoting directly, the government is set to reduce the fine imposed on people who fail to wear face masks in public from 6,000 baht to 1,000 baht for their first offense. And to be clear, this isn't in the criminal law, so to call it an offense, I think, is a little bit, I don't think that's the right terminology. First instance, maybe? First incident? Quoting further, those who break this law, now I'm going to get into this here in a minute, Those who break this law can currently be fined up to 20,000 baht, with the first-time offenders being fined at least 6,000 baht. Let's be clear. To proceed further, because there's a bunch of other things I'm going to cite where they say law or regulation. This is not a law or a regulation in the sense, and let me be clear on this, that there has been a piece of legislation which has been promulgated through Parliament, gone through the Cabinet, and then has been published in the Royal Gazette, which explicitly states people shall wear a face mask upon leaving their home. The penalty for such is 20,000 baht fine. There's not any statute that states it like that. And I think people have a misconception on this because of the media. Because the media is saying this law. Okay? Yes, there is law, and we've in the description to this video below, we're going to put up a link to another video I did on this, which is another like half-hour long video, where I went through the Communicable Diseases Act of 2015, and we broke out the basis for, or at least the basis that is being cited for making these, for lack of a better term, decrees, if you want to call them that, or making these citations, okay? And as I noted in that video, and we'll note further here because I'll go back through the analysis again, there is a Communicable Diseases Act of 2015. And in fact, let's just go ahead and get into it right this second. I'm going to go ahead and have our editor put up the relevant section. Did a whole video on this. Again, I'll put it in the description below. We did a whole video on this. It's like 30 minutes long where we broke out, but basically to summarize, they were citing Section 51 of the Communicable Diseases Act of 2015. Section 51 is the enabling language which takes you to Section 34, specifically subsection 6. They note a bunch of subsections under there. Most of those, and I urge you to go check out that video because it goes into great detail. But long story short, the only provision I could find which directly seems to be able to be what they're hanging their hat on with respect to these mask mandates, and let's call them that. They're mandates, okay? This isn't a law, this is a mandate that's just been announced by the government, and then they're citing this piece of legislation. But again, and I want to be clear on this, there's no statute that's just written specifically which says, you know, if you don't wear a mask outside your house, you're fined 20,000 baht. That is not what's happening here. These officers of the government, for example, these governors, are interpreting the Communicable Diseases Act to say folks that don't comply with this mask mandate have to pay this fine. And the section that I could best come up with, and we did all the disclaimers on this in the other video. I'll quickly do kind of briefly again. I am an American attorney. I've dealt with Thai law for a number of years. I am not a Thai attorney. I am a Thai citizen. This is also in the English language, and as they discuss in the copy, we'll go ahead and put the disclaimer up too from this same page of the Communicable Diseases Act from the Office of Counsel of State. The Thai is compelling. The Thai language of this legislation is compelling. That's the controlling language. So we're using this for informational purposes, but I have discussed this with Thai lawyers, folks who are fluent in Thai legal, not only in Thai, but in Thai legal language. I have a working command of Thai. Definitely not good enough for videos and such, but well, I guess it could be, but I just prefer not to do it. But I've reviewed this, and my theory of this is pretty sound based on the actual verbiage, the plain language of the statute. So again, we're going here to 34 subsection 6 of the Communicable Diseases Act, which is what Section 51 cites, which gives it that's the enabling for the fine. And it simply says, to prohibit any person from carrying out or performing any act which may cause unhygienic conditions that may result in the transmission of the dangerous communicable disease or epidemic. And my thing with this whole mandate is, this mandate is not prohibiting, in my analysis, prohibiting anyone from doing anything. What it is doing is actively and affirmatively compelling someone to do something. It's compelling people to wear a mask. I mean, the only other way to look at it from my perspective on this, or at least in my opinion, then it's a prohibition on breathing is the only thing that I can surmise from the analysis of this specific subsection, which I can't find any other subsection of the Act which clearly provides this power. Again, this is not a statute that says you must wear a mask or you are fined this amount. They are bringing that, based on the announcements made, at least from the Phuket governor, which cited Section 51 of the Communicable Diseases Act. This goes back to this, subsection 6. To prohibit and conceptually it's the same in Thai. To prohibit, to forestall. Well, they're not stopping you from doing anything. They're requiring you to do something with this mask mandate. And for that reason, it causes me to question on a legal level the authority there. Because the law here is saying they can prohibit. But what is the prohibition exactly? Is the prohibition on breathing outside your home? I thought that we as Thais had certain inalienable rights, most notably the right to breathe. So a prohibition of that seems kind of at odds with the Constitution, but that's sort of kind of beyond the scope of this video. Okay, so going back, the first thing I wanted to note on this is this constant sort of reference to this as a law. In one sense, yes, they're citing a law, but it's very different, and I think this is a nuance that's not semantics here, okay? The difference between an actual promulgated statute that said you have to wear masks or you face a fine of 20,000 baht is a very different thing than them kind of interpreting in through the Communicable Diseases Act, this ability to fine people based on this notion that they can prohibit things that could be deemed unhygienic. I think that analysis is attenuated at best. Probably the better, in my opinion, the better description is spurious. But okay, let's set that aside. And another thing to keep in mind, the Communicable Diseases Act was promulgated in 2015. This was not promulgated under a government or under a legislative structure that was democratically elected. Let's also note that. I don't want to get too deep into that. This definitely isn't a political thing, but we're talking policy, we're talking law. People are saying that this is based on a law. Well, okay, if you're going to say that, then let's look at the law, and let's look at the policy behind it, and let's look at how that law was created. And the fact is that this law was not created post-2019 under the current government. This was done back in 2015 under the National Legislative Assembly. That was a very different body than what we're dealing with today. You can go in and look at that, but historically that is the case. So, moving forward, that's just sort of on the issue of the law. And then at the same time, the media, in my opinion, again, a lot of things in this just, I hesitate to say they rankle me, but they're cause for concern, at least in my brain. Moving forward. Quoting directly, again, from government to cut fine on face masks. Again, this is Bangkok Post print edition, May 8, 2021. Quoting further, more police officers and staff from the Department of Corrections. So the Department of Corrections, the prison officers are going to be helping with this, are expected to be tasked with enforcing and I quote, this is what they specifically say, the face mask policy. Well, what is it? Is it a face mask law or is it a face mask policy? Those are two very different things. If it's not a law, then it doesn't have enforceability. That's, in my opinion, that's a different thing. But okay, we'll give them some poetic license. It's a newspaper report. Quoting further, and quoting directly from Anutin Charwirakul, who is the public health minister, quoting, apart from the face covering policy, social distancing and hand washing are still important measures to help us overcome the COVID-19 crisis, Mr. Anutin said. Well, okay, why are and this is a good question. Why aren't they law? You know, why isn't hand washing law? Why isn't social distancing law? Why were masks picked to be made law? Why was this law in quotes created for these masks and not social distancing and hand washing if they're just as important? I would sort of posit that question out there. Quoting further, Opas Kawinpong, Director General of the Department of Disease Control, said first-time offenders would be fined up to 1,000 baht, while second-time and third-time offenders would be fined up to 20,000 baht. Okay, and this quote I thought was odd. The policy was designed to make people aware of the COVID-19 situation, Dr. Opas said. Now, first part, the policy or the law? Is it a policy or is it a law? Is it a recommendation? Is it the policy of the government to recommend this? Or is it a law? What is it? And if it is a law, I mean, again, it's not some regulation that's been specifically spelled out. They're using, again, the Communicable Diseases Act, which does not in and of itself specifically state that this has to happen and that you can fine people arising from that specifically. It doesn't spell that out. Again, I find that concerning. But more than that, quoting again, the policy was designed to make people aware of the COVID-19 situation. Really? We're pretty aware. It's been a year. As I've said in another video, this is now May 2021. This is not May 2020. Believe me, the small business owner who lost his business is well aware of COVID-19. The people that can't come to Thailand have effectively been kept from reuniting with their families. They're well aware of COVID-19. People in the business world, people in the tourism sector, they're all aware of COVID-19. So if this thing was promulgated specifically to be out there as sort of like advertising for COVID-19, believe me, that was not necessary. Okay, so quoting further, now, getting kind of into the nuts and bolts side of this, that's kind of the legal analysis and some clearly a little bit of ranting on my part. I am sorry for the rant there. But, you know, I have been kind of concerned about the way the media has covered some of this. Meanwhile, there have been news reports on the nitty-gritty, you know, the practical implications of this new law, policy, whatever you want to call it. But before we go there, I thought it was worth noting, this is quoted from the WHO website and who.int. Coronavirus disease COVID-19 mass 1st December 2020 Q&A. Quoting directly, when outside, wear a mask if you cannot maintain physical distance from others. Some examples are busy markets, crowded streets, and bus stops. Now, the reason I'm citing the WHO here is one, I think, you know, and there are people across the internet that have all kinds of opinions on the WHO, especially here recently. You know, I still view them as being somewhat definitive on these topics, not even somewhat, as a definitive resource in the discussion of these topics. Also, and I want to be clear on this, I think the WHO always defaults to a more conservative position. And when I say conservative, I'm not talking politically or anything. I'm talking they're just going to be more stringent in what they recommend because they know that their language is used by people to sort of set their actions and reactions accordingly. So they know that if they say, yeah, face masks aren't that big a deal, people will just disdain them. Like a certain segment of the population will disdain face masks entirely, and that could cause a problem. So they have to be very measured in what they say. But again, this is interesting because the Thai rule, as the media is out there proclaiming, is one of you cannot leave your house without a mask or you get fined. Well, you know, is that warranted? And again, quoting directly from the WHO, when outside, wear a mask if you cannot maintain physical distance from others. Some examples are busy markets, crowded streets, and bus stops. Well, in the absence of that, shouldn't the rule of reason apply? The thing that's concerned me about this, and I'm going to get into this here in a minute, and this is on both sides. There have been folks that I'm not necessarily advocating an end to this mask mandate. What scares me is that this is a rule that says you have to wear something from the moment you leave your home. I find that concerning. Just again, personal disclosure here. I find that concerning just on a basic liberty level, both in an international context, basic human rights, and as a Thai. You know, there are inalienable rights associated with being a Thai, associated with being a human. And my opinion is that breathing in an unfettered capacity, you know, so long as it's not unreasonably harming other people, you know, you're not going to walk into a cancer ward where you've got somebody who's undergone some kind of radical, you know, procedure that causes them to have no immune system. No, I'm not going to go walking in there and just bothering them. But when I walk outside my house and there's nobody around, but I have to have a mask on, that seems a little over the top to me on a personal level. Again, full disclosure, this is my personal opinion. Back to the overall analysis here, you know, which brings us into some of these news reports I've seen. Some of it, and they're very concerning from both sides, in my opinion. Again, ThaiVisa.com, this one's titled Pattaya, Time for the Police to Fine Tourists for Flouting Mask Rules, says Thai media. Quoting directly, Somphon Cable TV on Facebook published pictures of white foreigners brazenly, and I love the verbiage, you know, the phraseology, brazenly walking about the beach area without wearing masks, you know, and quoting further, and again, this is it really rankles me on this. Strict regulations are now in place in Pattaya after establishments were ordered closed and other restrictions, including compulsory face mask wearing outside, were introduced as part of the deep red zone measures. Well, regulations, again, where? This isn't codified in, these mask mandates are not codified in specific language in the Communicable Diseases Act. Okay, let's go ahead and put these photos up of these Farang brazenly walking. I have to be honest with you. First of all, brazenly walking about the beach without wearing masks, that is correct. But if you notice, first of all, they're carrying them. Okay. Secondly, is anyone else around in these photos? Okay. This is my concern. You know, again, where's the rule of reason? Why has this become dogmatic? You know, you have to wear a face mask when you leave the house. Well, yeah, and as we'll get into in another video, I do see the argument, and I understand why people say, look, a crowded SkyTrain, we've got this epidemic, we've got this pandemic, you know, we want all folks getting on the SkyTrain to wear a mask because it's crowded, you're up next to people. Yeah, okay, I get it. Markets, yeah, okay, I get it. Supermarkets, yeah, maybe depending on circumstances, but okay, I understand the argument. Also, you know, private enterprise, if private organizations want to say, look, in order to come into our place, this is our rule, you know, going back to the whole notion of no shirt, no shoes, no service. You know, people have a right to refuse service in their establishments. I can understand that. And if they say, look, we're more comfortable with people wearing masks, I get that. I want to be clear, I'm not this ardent anti-masker. What I am ardently concerned about is when a government, any government, mandates that I have to wear something at all times. That scares me a lot. And again, going back to these photos, putting these back up here, you know, these two seem, you know, that's all blurred out. These two, I think I know where they're at. It looks like they're over on Jomtien Beach. There's no one else around these two. Okay, there's two of them. Okay, and they don't seem to be walking along with their arm hanging on each other or anything. They're walking along like two normal people. Presumably they know each other. So if they're going to spread this disease between each other, they probably are going to or already have done so. But more concerning to me, again, going back to this WHO quote, when outside, wear a mask if you cannot maintain physical distance from others. Some examples are busy markets, crowded streets, and bus stops. Well, are they on a crowded street? No. Are they in a busy market? No. Are they at a bus stop which is crowded with people? No. No, they're walking outside and there's no one else in the view. Okay, and apparently according to this article from Thai Visa, again, the article, Pattaya, Time for Police to Fine Tourists for Flouting Mask Rules, as they say in here, you know, apparently there's people that are saying, they need to go after these folks. A kind of an almost digital lynch mob almost seems to have arisen around some of these photos of people where people are saying, you got to go after them and get them. Well, why? The reason behind the rule is, like the WHO said, to mitigate spread in these kind of crowded areas. But people are going nuts over this. Again, as I've said in a lot of these videos, come on, can we take a breath and look at things reasonably? I get it. Getting on the BTS SkyTrain at rush hour, yeah, okay. Makes some sense under the current circumstances. And let me be clear, not for the rest of our born days. I hope everybody understands that. But for now, where we have this situation and, we've got this thing and it's infecting people and it's certainly a real disease. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, I get it. And we've yet to get the vaccines here in Thailand to really get people inoculated, those who want to be. I get it. But again, these photos, and to see the sort of vitriol unleashed against these folks that are in this video, in these photos, I just don't get why. There's no one there. It's not even in line with the spirit of the law, let alone the policy which underlines the law, again, quote unquote law, because again, this isn't a codified rule that says you must wear a mask outside or face a 20,000 baht fine. No, it's based on this. They can prohibit things, based on, the act. It's very vague, as we've discussed. And again, not really calling this guy out, but just kind of in the same vein, I'm going to go ahead and put this up. It was a tweet from Richard Barrow. Really like Richard Barrow, like reading his tweets. But again, this is a misconception. I don't think in this case he was intentionally trying to mislead or anything. It's just words have a power, and they get into the zeitgeist on their own, and they can gain sort of a life of their own. A perfect example is this tweet: a reminder that it is compulsory to wear a mask at all times whenever you leave your home. This is now law in every province of Thailand. If you don't want to do it for yourself, please do it for others. Thank you. But again, this is now law in every province in Thailand. Well, no, it is not. It is the interpretation of a law that is being decreed as a requirement, as a mandate in these provinces by these local governors. And that is a very different thing from codified statute. Again, the uses of these phrases are important. There's a big difference between a law and just what some government officer says is required. So, and then there are two sides to this whole argument of masks generally, not so much the law on masks. I have to kind of bifurcate my thinking a little bit sometimes, but just to show, I'm kind of in the middle on this, and I think that there's ways to be reasonable about non-mask wearing. I think the notion that you have to wear it outside at all times is pretty absurd. But at the same time, again, rule of reason applies here. And that rule of reason can cut many different ways. Quoting directly from another article from Thai Visa, thaivisa.com, article is titled, "Non-Mask Wearing Foreigner Makes National News, Sticks His Middle Finger Up and Refuses Free Mask." Quoting directly, "A foreigner who couldn't care less about the strict mask regulations now in place in Thailand has made the national Channel 7 news with his actions. They included a video of him sticking his middle finger up when confronted by locals at the Hang Dong market in Chiang Mai about his bad attitude." And this is what I thought was interesting, is he was hanging around this market, apparently, according to this, and quoting directly, "He was reportedly denied entry to the market but continued to mill about and displaying poor behavior to officials who confronted him." Well, I'll tell you, if somebody came up to me and I'm on an empty street or a very uncrowded street in Thailand, I just don't happen to have a mask on, I'm going to have some issues with that. Now, if I'm trying to walk into an establishment or I'm trying to walk into a crowded, market here in Thailand, little different. If Thais were to tell me, and I wouldn't do that, let me just be clear personally, but if Thais asked me and said, "Look, you can't come in here unless you're going to wear a mask," okay. To me, there's a rule of reason there. I can understand the argument, at least, in favor of, look, we got a bunch of people, we're all crowded around each other, this thing's spreading, this is our concern. All right, I can understand that. To become hostile and to flip people off over this thing, that's just wrong. And again, the rule of reason, that's not reasonable behavior, in my opinion. But to sort of sum this whole thing up, it has really rankled me these last few weeks, and it's only been a few weeks that we've been having to deal with this. I find it very interesting that it seems in other countries, the topic of masks, the narrative is starting to kind of thaw, if you will, because, again, I am not getting into the efficacy issue deeply, but I don't think there's a great deal of data out there, one way or the other, on if masks do anything. And in light of that, and in light of the fact that whether or not they do anything, my concern is more from a liberty standpoint and a human rights standpoint. I have a real problem when anyone tells anyone they have to wear something. That is a very slippery slope. It can lead to some very dangerous things. There have been a number of regimes in the past, throughout the world, by the way, and I'm not just pinpointing Thailand on this. You know, the U.S. has had these, and they've had them and repealed them and done all these kind of things. Just as concerned in that context as well. But, you know, when a government can tell you what you can or must wear, you need to at least perk up and be kind of concerned and want to know more deeply how exactly that works, at least in my opinion. But long story short, the thing, in my opinion, take away from this video, when you're reading the media and they first of all refer to this as a law, I hope you understand a lot going on with that between this video and our other one on this topic. I hope there's enough there that people can kind of understand just exactly what the legal posture of this all really is. The other thing is, yeah, I understand people's concerns. And while on the one hand, I think that there are people that are kind of hysterically in favor, there are people clearly hysterically against them. There has to be a rule of reason here. There has to be some kind of way to meet in the middle and find a way to deal with this without, you know, bothering people who really aren't doing anything out on an empty street, and also dealing with folks who are trying to go into crowded places and, you know, not really adhering to the current policy.